This up all the morning, his eyes searching the horizon as he moved from one side of the ship to the other. The inspection over, he slipped his arm through the actor's and started him down the deck toward the cattle agent's captain. When the two emerged, the Texan's face still wore the look which had rested on it since the time the captain had called him from the smoking room. The actor's countenance, however, had undergone a change. All his nervous timidity was gone. His lips were tightly drawn, the line of the jaw more determined. He looked like a man who had heard some news which had first steadied and then solidified him. These changes often overtake men of sensitive, highly strung natures. On the way back they encountered the captain accompanied by the chief engineer. The two were heading for the saloon, the bugle having sounded for luncheon. As they passed by with their easy, swinging gait, the passengers watched them closely. If there was danger in the air, these two officers of all men would know it. The captain greeted the Texan with a significant look, waited until the actor had been presented, looked the Texan's friend over from head to foot, and then with a nod to several of the others, halted opposite a steamer chair in which sat the widow and her two children, one a baby and the other a boy of 4, a plump, huggable little fellow, every inch of whose surface invited a caress. "Please stay a minute, and let me talk to you, Captain," the widow pleaded. "I've been so worried. None of these stories are true, are they? There can't be any danger, or you would have told me, wouldn't you?" The captain laughed heartily, so heartily that even the chief engineer looked at him in astonishment. "What stories do you hear, my dear lady?" "That the steamer isn't loaded properly?" Again the captain laughed, this time under the curls of the chubby boy, whom he had caught in his arms and was kissing eagerly. "Not loaded right," he puffed at last when he got his breath. "Well, well, what a pity! That yarn, I guess, comes from some of the navigators in the smoking room. They generally run the ship. Here, you little rascal, turn out your toes and dance a jig for me. No, no, not that way. This way or out with 'em. Here, let me show you. 1, 2, off we go. Now the pigeon wing and the double twist and the rat-tat-tat, rat-tat-tat. That's the way, my lad." He had the boy's hands now, the child shouting with laughter, the overjoyed mother clapping her hands as the big burly captain, with his face twice as red from the exercise, danced back and forth across the deck, the passengers forming a ring about them. "There!" sputtered the captain, all out of breath from the exercise, as he dropped the child back into the widow's arms. "Now all of you come down to luncheon. The weather is getting better every minute. The glass is rising, and we are going to have a fine night." Carhart, who had watched the whole performance with an ill-concealed sneer on his face, muttered to the man next him, "What did I tell you? He's a pretty kind of a captain, ain't he? He's mashed on the widow just as I told you. Smoking room yarn, is it? I bet I could pick out half a dozen men right in them chairs who could run the ship as well as he does. Maybe we'll have to take charge, after all. Don't you think so, Mr. Bonner?" The Texan smiled grimly. "I'll let you do the picking, Mr. Carhart." And with his hand on the actor's arm, the two went below. A counter-current now swept through the ship. If anything was really the matter, the captain would not be dancing jigs, nor would he leave the bridge for his meals. This, like all other counter-currents, wave or otherwise, tossed up a bobble of dispute when the two clashed. There was no doubt about it. Carhart had been talking through his hat, shooting off his mouth, the man was a gas-bag, etc., etc. When appeal for confirmation was made to the Texan and the actor, who now seemed inseparable, neither made reply. They evidently did not care to be mixed up in what Bonner characterized with a grim smile as more hot air. All through the meal the captain kept up his good-natured mood, chatting with the widow who sat on his right, the baby in her lap, making a pig of a lemon and some toothpicks for the boy, who had crawled up into his arms, exchanging nods and smiles down the length of the table with several new arrivals, or congratulating those nearest to him on their recovery after the storm, ending by carrying both boy and baby to the upper deck, so that he might not forget how to handle his own when he got back, he left in explanation. Part 3. Luncheon over, the passengers, many of whom had been continuously in their berths, began to crowd the decks. These soon discovered that the ship was not on an even keel, a fact confirmed when attention was called to the slant of the steamer chairs and the roll of an orange toward the scuppers. Explanation was offered by the Texan, who argued that the wind had hauled, and being then abeam had given her a list to starboard. This, while not wholly satisfactory to the more experienced, allayed the fears of the women (there were 2 or 3 on board beside the widow), who welcomed the respite from the wrench and stagger of the previous hours. Attention was now drawn by a nervous passenger to a gang of sailors under the first officer, who were at work overhauling the boats on the forward deck, immediately under the eyes of the captain, who had returned to the bridge, as well as to an approaching wall of fog which, while he was speaking, had blanketed the ship, sending 2 of the boat gang on a run to the bow. The fog-horn also blew continuously, almost without intermission. Now and then it, too, would give 3 short, sharp snorts, as if of warning. The passengers had now massed themselves in groups, some touch of sympathy or previous acquaintance or trait of courage but recently discovered, having drawn them together. Again the captain passed down the deck. This time he stopped to light a cigarette from a passenger's cigar, remarking as he did so that it was as thick as pea soup on the bridge, but he thought it would lighten before morning. Then halting beside the chair of an old lady who had but recently appeared on deck, he congratulated her on her recovery and kept on his way to the boats. The widow, however, was still anxious. "What are they doing with the boats?" she asked, her eyes following the captain's disappearing figure. "Only overhauling 'em, madam," spoke up the Texan, who had stationed himself near her chair. "But isn't that unusual?" she inquired in a tremulous voice. "No, madam, just precaution, always a safe one in a fog. Collision comes so quick sometimes they don't have time even to clear the davits." "But the sailors are carrying up boxes and kegs and putting them in the boats. What's that for?" broke in another passenger, who had been leaning over the forward rail. "Grub and water, I guess," returned the Texan. "It's 1,000 miles to the nearest land, and there ain't no bakery on the way, that I know of. Can't be too careful where there's women and babies aboard, special little fellas like these," and he ran his hand through the boy's curls. "The captain don't take no chances. That's what I like him for." Again the current of hope submerged the current of despair. The slant of the deck, however, increased, although the wind had gone down, so much so that the steamer chairs had to be lashed to the iron handholds skirting the wall of the upper cabins. So had the fog, which was now so dense that it hid completely the work of the boat gang. With the passing of the afternoon and the approach of night, thus deepening the gloom, there was added another and a new anxiety to the drone of the fog-horn. This was a Coston signal which flashed from the bridge, flooding the deck with light and penciling masts and rigging in lines of fire. These flashes kept up at intervals of 5 minutes, the colors changing from time to time. An indefinable fear now swept through the vessel. The doubters and scoffers from the smoking room, who stood huddled together near the forward companionway, talked in whispers. The slant of the deck, they argued, might be due to a shift of the cargo, a situation serious, but not dangerous. But why burn Costons? The only men who seemed to be holding their own, and who were still calm and undisturbed, were the Texan and the Actor. These, during the conference, had moved toward the flight of steps leading to the bridge, and had taken their positions near the bottom step, but within reach of the widow's chair. Once the Actor loosened his coat and slipped in his hand as if to be sure of something he did not want to lose. While this was going on, the captain left the bridge in charge of the second officer and descended to his cabin. Reaching over his bunk, he unhooked the picture of his wife and child,